Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Small Talk with Shibby, my LCS post-game interview content. I'm joined by C9 Fudge, the top laner. Unfortunately, Fudge, you did end with a loss here to Golden Guardians, but I do want to kind of step back and maybe talk about more what it's like preparing as a team, not just for the LCS, but also for international competition, right? I think you guys, C9, are in a very interesting spot where obviously you won last split, you went to international competition, you probably didn't have the result that you wanted, of course. Obviously, your expectations are now for Worlds. How do you guys kind of balance maybe practicing for the LCS and winning the LCS, obviously, but also trying to become a more diverse team and trying to say, hey, you know what? Winning the LCS isn't good enough. We need to make sure that we're prepared, or at least somewhat prepared, to go against some of the top international teams.
I think realistically, uh, prepping to win the LCS and prepping to win internationally is pretty much the same. You're just trying to diversify as a team, make sure that you're able to play multiple styles, um, cleaning up a lot of like mistakes, fundamental errors, macro mistakes, stuff like that. And it's the same game. We're still playing League of Legends, and obviously the international teams are better, like fundamentally, like mechanically, but also at the really small like macro ideas, they understand a little bit better when it comes about like Herald or Dragons or vision control, stuff like this. So we're all, I wouldn't say the prep is different for trying to win NA or trying to go do well internationally. It's sort of just a process that, week by week, we're slowly improving at little things that we notice other international teams are doing, and then seeing, obviously naturally, if you're going to just improve, you're probably just going to win in NA, especially when your players are just good individually.
Speaking of progression, I think every team has a different meaning for that, whether they're, a 10th place team or in your case, like a first place team. In regards to progressing as a team, what are the things that C9 is looking at, right? Obviously, there are patch reads, meta reads, stuff like that. Are you looking to maybe communicate differently, right? Are you looking to maybe carry from different roles, right? Like you said, you guys are practicing more flexible compositions. I spoke to Blabber a couple weeks ago. He kind of said the same thing where you guys are trying to look into carrying and being more diverse as a team. In C9's eyes, or in your case, in Fudge's eyes, what does progress mean for that aspect?
I mean, it can mean, there can be a lot of different things that you can progress at. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, for us, there's some things like, for example, tracking TPs, tracking summoner spells as a team, and playing around those when it comes to macro, like understanding when you have TPs and when you don't, what you need to do on the map to make sure that the enemy team can't get certain plays off, stuff like that. And that's one of the things that we were definitely improving a lot at this week of scrims. And obviously, you can go down the list of a million different variables, but for the most part, it's just the really small things that no one's really going to be perfect at, but you sort of just have to slowly get better. And no one's it's also not really noticeable. Like you don't really notice the big change, the small changes, but after a while they add up, and you don't, like, for example, today there was the timing where they swapped on us, GGS swapped on us, and we weren't prepared for it, and we weren't thinking about it. And little things like that, like thinking about if they can swap or not, and that's something you can work on as a team, with communication, but also the players being more aware of it individually, which is a very like obvious mistake, right? If you're not thinking about whether or not they can swap with Aphelios and White Gun, but you still make those mistakes even as pro players, and just getting more sound or like stable when it comes to those decisions and making sure that you're thinking of them every single game is something that you can improve at, and it takes a lot of focus, but it also doesn't necessarily like show in your gameplay, I guess, a lot of the time.
I do want to talk about, I mean, obviously some of the losses, right? You guys have had very few. Obviously, TL was a pretty big loss, and obviously Golden Guardians, two teams that I think are expected to make it to playoffs, all things
Right.
considered. When facing up against these teams, right, in the early round robins, or in this case, the second round robin, um, for you guys as a squad, is it more important to kind of figure them out as a team and try to understand, like, hey, how do they like to win? How do they like to play? Or are you guys more focusing on, like, how can we make them play our style? How can we make them, I guess, conform to our composition's win conditions, right? Where does the practice really come into effect for you guys? What are you guys most focusing on?
I think when it comes to styles of play that certain teams have, obviously, like you can understand, like for example, we play against Immortals. They don't play carry top laners.
No.
You can understand that, but for the most part, you aren't really like prepping for a specific team. And usually, different teams have different styles. For example, TL play through top lane, and you play against EG or something. They play through mid jungle. There's a lot of different teams have different styles. Some teams play through bot lane majority of the time. And we're all sort of just trying to improve our fundamental gameplay and not really focus on our opponents for the most part. Once we get into playoffs and we like, okay, we're playing in playoffs, our first round is going to be against 100 Thieves. 100 Thieves, they like to play Renekton and Xante and these top laners that are stable, don't really need a lot of jungle attention. They play through mid and bot lane. Stuff like this where like, yeah, you understand them as a team, and then you draft around that. You practice specific picks for it. You do that sort of thing. You don't really do that a lot in regular season, just because you're playing against a different team every single like day, pretty much. So um, we're just trying to get better fundamentally, like ourselves. We're focusing on ourselves more, and then once players comes around, we'll focus on all the opponents and their different styles and their tendencies.
I think an underrated aspect for a team like you guys, who were obviously our number one and one last split, is kind of carrying that success over into the next split and into international tournaments and stuff like that. What has kind of been the hardest challenge for you guys to kind of say like, hey, we're a top team, we need to stay a top team? I mean, I feel like, not in any kind of sport, right? The highest teams, the teams that have higher records, are always getting prepped more for, right? They're trying to ban you out, or they're trying to put more pressure on you, or they're trying to figure out a way to win because they know that that win will give them more value than maybe beating like a 10th place team or a 9th place team. What do you think has been the hardest aspect for you individually, and also C9 as a whole, to kind of say, hey, we were first place last split, let's carry this success over, even though we're kind of inadvertently leveling up the rest of LCS?
I think for me individually, after winning 2 splits in a row now, and this is obviously going to the third, hopefully, it's really hard to maintain a high level of focus and sort of like humility, I guess, when it comes to like what you need to improve, and looking at the really small things that you do that you'll get punished for internationally, but you don't really get punished for domestically, and improving those, because those small things are also, people do pick up on them domestically, and eventually they become problems. So being diligent, I guess, and not really allowing yourself to be comfortable just because we won the last 2 splits, so you think you're just gonna win in the next split, So I think that's something I struggled with for the first couple of weeks of LCS, and I definitely noticed that in myself, and try to definitely put a lot more focus on the small things, I guess, and the small mistakes. And for example, today I died to a gank at level 7, level 8, right? Those small mistakes that it's easy to look past because it's just like, oh, it's just one death. I hardly died to ganks, but maybe there's something in my gameplay that allows me, that I'm not paying attention to, where I don't have enough awareness around the jungler, what his path is, what camps he's on, what his jungle CS is, and that leads to that death, and that can be a bigger problem in the future, just because I don't have those fundamentals down. So individually, I would say a lot of it is that. As a team, I think it's similar, where we're definitely just, I think, overconfident, to be honest. We win our games, but we still make similar mistakes in a lot of the games. But we win anyway a lot of the time. And once we lose, like today, for example, we'll go back and look at the mistakes and say like, okay, we need to improve at these things and these things and these things. But we don't do that when we win. And I think it's really hard to keep winning if you don't do that, just because we will win in regular season, we go playoffs, and then a team notices this trend that we like die to jungle ganks at 6 minutes a lot because we think that his jungle's on bot side a lot of the time, something like this. They notice a trend like that, and then we get punished for it in playoffs. So being very diligent as a team as well on those team-wide mistakes, not realizing that they're going to swap for Herald, for example. That this has happened in scrims a lot. But until we get really punished for it on stage and we don't react at all properly, and we get really far behind and we can't play the game. Feels really bad. Now we'll fix it. I think it's really hard, but remaining diligent as a team on those mistakes as well is probably our biggest struggle, and it's probably just going to be the biggest struggle always for the winning team. It's really hard to be as hard on yourself when you're winning as you are when you're losing.
Final question here. I don't know if you had a chance to look at or see the interview that Berserker did with Ashley in regards to the solo queue mindset. Yeah, I just wanted to hear your take on it and whether obviously you believe that notion. I think you guys in C9, a lot of you are grinders, right? Sven, hard grinder, right? Berserker, hard grinder. No doubt. And Menace, I think when he first came in, just started grinding solo queue, top of the ladder. I think everybody in your team, do you kind of share that same mindset where ultimately solo queue is an excuse for a lot of NA pros? Do you kind of feel that, are you a little bit less harsh as Berserker? Like, how do you kind of feel about all that?
In terms of solo queue, I don't know the exact quote that he said, but I think I understand the general sentiment. For me, I think a lot of pro players blame NA solo queue for their lack of ability to improve, and I think a lot of it is actually just their lack of focus they put into the solo queue. I think the reason why they find Korean boot camps so good for their improvement is actually just because it's a whole different environment, it's a whole different mentality, and that's actually what leads to their improvement. And the amount of focus they put on the games is way higher when you obviously like travel to a different country for 2 weeks to grind, right? But you can improve your focus even if I'm in the same environment. I can improve my focus depending on how much value I put on these solo queue games. And I think the biggest problem is actually that people just think that it's bad automatically, so they don't put focus on the game, so therefore they don't improve. Whereas when you go solo queue in Korea, everyone else is taking it seriously, so therefore you'll take it seriously. So therefore you'll focus, therefore you'll improve much more. Obviously, there's the aspects, right? I think like that's probably only about like 60% of it, 70% of it. I think there is like a 30% of it where yes, you're playing against players who are going to push you way harder, and you are going to improve naturally just playing against better players. That's just the reality of it. But I do think that there's a lot that pro players can do despite having lower like solo queue practice levels, you can say, or opponents slightly worse than NA solo queue. But I think a lot of it is an excuse to just sort of not to just have an excuse to not be as good as a player, I guess.
It's probably, I think people would view it's hard to be like introspective and proactive about your own improvement, right? Like that's one of those things where you kind of have to look outside of the environment you're in and say, well, even though I won this lane or won this matchup, I fucked up this trade at like the third wave or the fourth wave or something like that.
Exactly. And that's the sort of mentality you need to have to improve as a pro player, because realistically, you focus in solo queue, you're gonna win every single game if you're a good pro player. Like you're gonna win, you're gonna be easily rank 1 if you actually focus. But no pro player really puts focus on solo queue as much as like even close to as much as scrims. And at least all the pro players I know, right? I could not know the pro players. I don't talk to a lot of Korean pro players and LPL pro players. It's possible that they put in like the same amount of focus. I very much doubt it. I'm sure it's still a little bit lower for them, but yeah, you have to have that diligence of like, yes, I went up 40 CS in this matchup, but level 3, like you said, I just took this really bad trade, and he should have died here. Instead, he was forced to base and stuff like that.
Well, Fudge, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me. Do you have any final message to the C9 fans?
Yeah, the loss sucks, but you have to trust us that we'll improve. I think we all know, we all hate losing a lot. Hate losing probably more than anyone else, which is why we win a lot. So we're going to improve a lot, and I'm glad that these losses are happening in regular season rather than in playoffs.